안녕하세요, 셀리입니다. 오늘은 많은 분들이 궁금해 하시고 또 실수도 많이 하시는 recommend 표현에 대해서 알아보도록 하겠습니다. 제가 이 영상에서 경주에 가보시는 것을 추천드립니다 라는 표현 알려드렸었는데요. 이 표현에 대해서 좀 더 제대로 구체적인 설명을 듣고 싶다 하시는 분들이 계시다는 소문을 들었습니다. 그래서 혹시 영어로 뭐라고 하는지 기억나시나요? 이 영상 못 보신 분들은 나중에 꼭 시청해 주시고요. 지금은 같이 머릿속으로 영작을 한번 해볼게요. I recommend you to visit 경주. I recommend you visiting 경주. I recommend visiting 경주. I recommend you should visit 경주. I recommend that you visit 경주. 이 문장들 중에 두 개가 맞는 형태인데요. 어떤 게 맞는 문장일까요? 이 답을 들어도 뭔가가 껄쩍지근한 게 이 recommend거든요. 그럼 오늘도 탐쌤한테 바르고 정확한 표현이 뭔지 제대로 배워보도록 하겠습니다.
안녕하세요, 탐입니다.
Okay, Tom, today we're going to talk about the structure of the verb recommend.
Right.
Because it has kind of tricky structure.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
What is that?
Okay, so the verb recommend, you know what it means already. The verb recommend should be followed by one of three things. It can be followed by a noun. I recommend the pasta at this restaurant. It could be followed by a gerund.
동명사 in Korean.
Okay, which is a verb with an ing at the end of it. I recommend taking a vacation next year. Or it can be followed by a phrase with the word that
대절,
plus an uninflected verb.
동사 원형.
Okay, so I recommend that you watch this movie. I recommend that you take a vacation.
Or I recommend he watch the movie.
That too. I recommend he see a doctor.
You don't say he sees a doctor.
No,
You have
that's
to say
that's why it's called uninflected, because you don't change the verb at all. You just take away the to from the infinitive.
So what about this? Because when you search on Google, you can see some sentences like I recommend you to visit Gyeongju. I recommend you visiting Gyeongju.
Right.
So are they wrong?
Yes, yes,
Oh.
yes, those are not correct. To recommend something to something else or to someone else is the right way to use to. Try to think of it as something is moving from one place to another. I recommend you to my boss. You're going from me to my boss. The recommendation is going from me to my boss. So for example, if I've read a good book, I could say, hey, I've got a book I'd like to recommend to you. Anything that you can give to someone else, whether it's a recommendation, a book, something that's going from you to them, you can recommend to. But you can't recommend to plus a verb. I recommend you to visit. You can't do that.
Who wrote those sentences on Google?
So I can understand why people might put them up there, but it's likely they're not native speakers. Even native speakers who don't study English, it just sounds wrong to your ear.
So even not in spoken English, you would say that.
Not even in very informal, casual English between good friends. It's not even like accidental slang.
Okay.
It's incorrect. But because there are so many uses of recommend, non-native speakers who might feel very confident in their English could easily make a mistake that way.
Now what about this? 당신에게 제 의사를 추천드려요. 그래서 사형식 동사로 I recommend you my doctor. Is it okay?
I recommend you my doctor. No, that's not okay either.
What should I say?
For that example, you would need to say the recommend plus that plus the uninflected verb again. I recommend that you see my doctor. Or I recommend you see my doctor. You can leave that out.
Okay, so 사형식 동사로는 쓰이지 않고 사명식 동사로만 쓰이는 거네요. Then what about this? I recommend my doctor to you.
I recommend my doctor to you. That would be okay. I recommend my doctor to you. I think we would more likely say, I recommend that you see my doctor.
Okay, so 당신에게 제 의사를 추천드려요. I recommend my doctor to you.도 틀린 건 아니지만 for native speakers, 원어민들은 그 동사를 넣어서 I recommend you see my doctor가 더 자연스럽다는 거죠.
Correct.
Then let's practice with some sentences because it's really hard structure. Okay, 막걸리를 전이랑 같이 드실 것을 추천드려요.
I recommend you have makgeolli with chon. Or, I recommend having makgeolli with chon.
Yeah, because 막걸리 and 전 are Korean, so you don't.
And they go very well together.
Yeah, you know that, right?
I know that.
What about like 전? Should I say something else in English? Korean pancake?
Yeah, you could say Korean pancake.
Okay.
I don't think anyone would quite understand what it is though, because to an American,
Yeah,
a
they
pancake is only one thing. It's a breakfast food.
Okay. 저희 회사 앞에 있는 중국 식당을 추천드려요.
I recommend the Chinese restaurant in front of our office. I recommend the Chinese restaurant in front of our office.
아이랑 척키치즈 가보시는 걸 추천드려요. 척키치즈가 미국의 키즈 카페죠.
Okay. I recommend you take your kids to Chuck E. Cheese. Or, I recommend taking your kids to Chuck E. Cheese.
소리라는 영화 보실 것을 추천드려요.
I recommend you watch the movie Soul. Or, I recommend watching the movie Soul.
저희 요가 선생님이 매일 아침 스트레치 할 것을 추천하세요.
My yoga instructor recommends I stretch every morning. Or, my yoga instructor recommends stretching every morning.
정답은 3번 I recommend visiting 경주와 5번 I recommend you visit 경주가 되겠습니다. 네, 우리 연습까지 같이 해봤습니다. 이제 안 헷갈리실 거라고 생각 들고요. 이게 또 한국말 때문에 이게 사형식 동사인 것 같기도 하고 이렇게 투부정사를 받을 것 같기도 하고 또 그런 문장들을 보니까 많이 헷갈렸거든요. 도움 되셨기를 바라고요. 그럼 저희는 또 다음 영상에서 또 만나 뵙도록 하겠습니다. 수고하셨습니다.
수고하셨습니다.
Bye.
I recommend you have makgeolli with chon. Or, I recommend having makgeolli with chon. I recommend you have makgeolli with chon. Or, I recommend having makgeolli with chon. I recommend the Chinese restaurant in front of our office. I recommend the Chinese restaurant in front of our office. I recommend you take your kids to Chuck E. Cheese. Or, I recommend taking your kids to Chuck E. Cheese. I recommend you take your kids to Chuck E. Cheese. Or, I recommend taking your kids to Chuck E. Cheese. I recommend you watch the movie Soul. Or, I recommend watching the movie Soul. I recommend you watch the movie Soul. Or, I recommend watching the movie Soul. My yoga instructor recommends I stretch every morning. Or, my yoga instructor recommends stretching every morning. My yoga instructor recommends I stretch every morning. Or, my yoga instructor recommends stretching every morning.